Hi everyone, we're the Apex for Youth Ambassadors, and today's episode is about the Asian LGBTQ plus experience. And talking about the Apex for Youth Ambassadors in general, our mission statement is to amplify the Asian American youth voice through community-based projects in order to work towards a just future. And the way that we saw that mission statement playing into this context was that as we were talking about our life experiences and our stories, doing research for this podcast, we were noticing how many differences there were in our stories. And we kind of saw this mission statement to show that there is not just one Asian queer experience. And so we wanted to use this episode to document some of those stories and kind of show how many differences there could be. So just to get started, I guess we can all introduce ourselves. So my name is Sophia, and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm in 10th grade.
Hi, my name is Miki, and I am in the 11th grade. My pronouns are currently she, her, and I identify as a bisexual queen. Let's go.
My name is Waylene. I'm also 11th grade. My pronouns are she, her.
So this episode is part of a 3-part episode with other Asian American youth that are also Apex for Youth Ambassadors that will be covering episodes such as media and family in relation to Asian American youth. To get started with that episode, Waylene, can you introduce our first topic?
Yeah, so the first topic that we will be touching upon in today's podcast is our own personal experiences with our family, how they see the LGBTQ community, and how that in turn affects us.
With my family, the LGBTQIA community is not talked about at all. And I don't know about you guys, but I am not out to my family at all. I don't think I will be because if it's something that we don't talk about, it's probably something that's not accepted. And I do remember a conversation briefly a few years back when I asked my mom something about the LGBTQIA community and asked her, "Do you think this is okay?" And she just straight up said no, with no hesitation whatsoever. So I kind of knew then that I can't come out, and I feel like that's very different from some of your experiences that we talked about in our own conversation. So does anyone want to share about that?
Yeah, I would definitely say that my experience was very different, and I'm very fortunate enough to be able to say that. Um, I don't really know the first time I guess we ever talked about like queer issues in my family, but it's been a kind of a general consensus that it's accepted. Um, and I think I am the only one that's out in this group, but I came out in the middle of 6th grade, I think, and it was very random. But they've always accepted me, and I'm really grateful for that.
Yeah, I think my experience is a lot more similar to Mickey's. Once I brought up the topic of the LGBT community in a conversation with my grandma, and there wasn't a sense of disagreement, but more so flat out acknowledgement that gay and trans people exist. And in conversations with my dad, he has said some pretty hostile things about the community, including using slurs. And because of that initial experience, I have avoided talking to him about these things at all.
I feel like in popular media, coming out is sort of like a sense of pride, a sense of like, hey, I'm doing this and I feel great about myself. And even if my family doesn't like accept me, like most queer people or people who identify just like in the LGBTQIA community in general, when they come out in movies or in books, it's sort of like if they don't accept me, it's okay. I am like strong and either way. But with I feel like I don't know about you, Aileen, but in my situation, if I come out, I don't have a roof over my head. Like I'm going to be kicked out, and I feel like it's more of a survival sense. Like maybe in the future, but right now I don't see it as a possible like option.
I guess part of that is also acknowledging that the coming out process is different for everyone. I think it really is a personal experience. For example, personally, I do relate to what you said about it being as more of a survival reaction. Like knowing that because your family won't accept you, you probably won't have any support systems or even a roof over your head.
I agree with what you said about like how I guess coming out is like I guess, romanticized in a way in media, where it's like this big momentous occasion, and how it's like the same for everyone, or it's supposed to be one certain way. But I definitely don't think it's the case. I guess in my experience, I did understand that I was like in a safe space, but basically what happened was that I came out to my parents and then asked them to never talk about it again. And so we didn't for like 3 years. And it's only been recently that we've kind of like been talking about it again. So I think what you said about the media is definitely true.
Yeah, the media can be harmful in a sense, but it also can be good sometimes. Like just to see yourself like a queer character in a movie, even if it's just like a minor character in a movie or in a book, you're like, oh my god, they're there. That's me. That's us. Let's go. But also at the same time, it's like I look at them and most of them are white. Most of them aren't Asian, and it's sort of like also at the same time, I can't like expose my family to that kind of media because they don't accept it anyway. So like seeing it on a big screen and just having to be like, I have to like prevent myself from going, oh, that's me, or like, oh, that's so cool. Like I have to be like, oh yeah, that character was interesting. Like I have to like sort of be a different person, and it's really hard to know what kind of person I am.
With what Miki said about exposing your parents to queer media, like I have previously mentioned, my dad isn't the most supportive of the LGBTQ community, and that is definitely an understatement. So while we were scheduling the podcast, something that I kept in mind was when my dad was going to be home, because I didn't feel like I was in a safe space if I was going to be openly discussing these topics.
I think it's definitely hearing all of your experiences and how they're so different from mine is just like reminded me how fortunate I am to be in this position. I guess I'm in such a position of privilege to not have to have those experiences or think about those things.
I do think that even in a position where you are privileged, it's still something that we should celebrate as well. Like I feel like we tend to acknowledge like the privilege being like, oh, the bad. But I find it really amazing that you have such a supportive family and that society has progressed to a point where you can have that support. And I hope society progresses more. And if I ever have children, I want them to know like they don't have to come out to me. Like they can just be like, "Hey, mom, I have a boyfriend," and I'm like, "Hell yeah, let's go." You know, like I don't like want that to happen. But also to bring up a second topic is a language barrier sometimes. Like you communicate with your family, you like experience loss. Like I am not like fully fluent in my native language. Like I don't know how to say certain words. I don't even know how to say gay in like Chinese. Like I don't know how to say, "Oh, mom, I'm gay" in Chinese. Like it's kind of like, how do I explain something when I can't explain something?
Yeah, I definitely agree, especially with my extended family. I think in general, my like immediate family's acceptance of queer stuff is pretty much limited to about that. Like I would never come out to like my grandparents or anything. I think in terms of like a language barrier, I don't really know how to talk about those kinds of things with him and with my grandparents in general. And I think there's particularly like a generational difference, and cultural difference that I don't know how to cross.
So it was really interesting to see just how many different perspectives there are when it comes to the LGBT community, and how, although we have such different experiences, we are still able to connect through this podcast and listen to each other's stories. And with that, we'll be discussing more about how that has affected our queer identity in relation to our social life, our friends, how it's like in school.
So we decided to do a difference between families and friends because we noticed that the way we present ourselves to our family and to our friends is like very different. Like it's like kind of like almost a different version of yourself in a sense. So um with my friends, I am very much openly like myself. Like I make jokes about my queer identity. I like sort of like I can like just be me in a sense that it's not like I'm not me with my family. It's just another part of me that I can share, like I'm allowed to share. And yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely the same for me. I think almost everyone in my friend group, both in my old school and my current school, were queer. And I know in media, there's like the whole idea of the token gay kid in the friend group. We have our token straight kid in the friend group who's the only one. And we just, it's just nice to have like a community of queer people who kind of understand what you're going through most of the time. And like making jokes about your queer identity is always nice. It's different, even though I can talk about my identity with my parents, it's different. And they don't really understand like, I guess, queer jargon and things like that. So it's nice to know people that will understand what you're going through.
I think it's really interesting how queer people gravitate towards one another even before they had time to discover their own identity. I mean, that's how it was like in my anecdotal experience and also with my queer friends.
I really connected to something that you guys said about just like being able to connect to like queer people. And in relation to the Asian American identity, it's kind of like when I see an Asian person in the room, I automatically gravitate toward them. Like I automatically feel like I'm safe in this space because I have someone who relates to me. I have someone who understands my experiences, and it's kind of I think it might be the same with people of the queer identity, and just like sort of knowing like you're accepted in that space, and you accept them, and there's a and in relationships, I know it's important to have trust. So when you're accepted, there's a lot of trust in that situation.
Okay. Miki, I noticed how you talked a little bit about how when you see an Asian person, you automatically gravitate towards them because like you feel like you can relate to them. Do you think when you're looking at different queer people, do you think that you gravitate towards more queer people of color, or do you not see a difference between the experiences of white queer people and queer people of color?
You know what I do notice is that with like my white queer friends, like I love them to death, but the way they're openly queer is very different from my friends who are openly queer. Not openly queer, but like it's more hidden in a sense. It's like a second identity. Like when you see them, you first see Asian, then you get to know them, and then you think like, oh, that person's queer, part of the LGBTQIA community. But with my white friends, it's kind of like they have full on pride flag shirts. They have tote bags with little keychains with like the pride flag on them. And I can't do that. Like I notice I can do that, and I don't know about my friends, but they're very different. Like my queer friends, they would like, oh, they have like a small like wallpaper that says, "Hey, I'm a rainbow. I'm Skittles." I don't know why they do that, but they do. And my white queer friends, everything about them just screams, "Hey, hi, I'm here and I'm queer and I'm here to stay." But I'm like it. I don't know how to explain this, but it's just like there's a difference, and I gravitate more towards like the openly queer white friends because I know that they are queer.
So going back to what Miki said about how she can be more open with her friends about her queerness rather than with her family. Personally, this is in my own experience. I still don't find that comfort in my friends or even the one person who I think I'm closest to in my entire life.
Relating back to family in relations to our identity, my experience has definitely been shaped by the way that I have been brought up. In my family, we don't talk about our feelings, and on social media, there isn't a lot of representation. And because of that, I feel like I am a lot more closed off about personal topics like these, especially in comparison to my cousin. My cousin is also queer, and she has already come out to her parents, and her parents are supportive. And what I've come to notice is that she is a lot more open about her queer identity than I am.
So you bring up an amazing point that I want to relate to, and it's actually I'm in a pretty similar situation. My best friend, who is also my cousin, so it's kind of like bordering that weird like family and friend kind of line because she's also a distant cousin. She's also queer, and once she like in a sort of heated moment in argument told her that she was gay, and her mom didn't really react at all. Like her mom didn't react the way like she told me, texted me about it. I was so worried for her safety, but no, she was fine. And I feel like kind of like that's weird because we're in the same family, but you would have a different experience than the one I would have. So I really relate to that, Waylene, and it's kind of like sad to know, but also like happy to know that she's in a space where it's semi-supportive. It's not fully supportive, but it's like, you know, sort of there.
Yeah. There's also like kind of a sense of unwanted jealousy in that, because I know that while we were on text one day, my cousin was like, "Oh my God, my mother just said in your future when you marry a boy or a girl," and she was like, "Wow, I'm so happy that she said that and finally acknowledged who I am." And it's like, "Oh wow, that's so good." Like I was very happy for her, but at the same time, I did feel that jealousy knowing that I would never get that feeling or hear those words from my father.
I'll adopt you. You'll be my child. I'll let you know. I'm proud of you, Waylene. So proud of you.
I'm proud of you too.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of that jealousy that William was talking about, do you guys see like a sort of hierarchy in like the queer community? Do you feel like there's some people that are like above others in terms of like acceptance or in terms of, I guess, like superiority?
Yes. And it's in like multiple intersecting ways too. Like there's a hierarchy based on race, based on gender, based on like your queer identity within the queer community. Like there is hate in between the queer community. Like people will hate on like asexual people for no reason at all. People hate on bi people for no reason at all. Hate on the trans community for no reason at all. And it's kind of like there are levels within levels. And I identify as a first person of color, person who is a female, person who has a mental disability, person who is just generally like I got so many issues, guys. Y'all don't even know, but I'm here. It's okay. And I'm also queer. And within the queer community, I have like so many other layers that kind of like pushes me down a couple of ranks. And the of course the white queer community is at top of my already oppressed group of people. So it's kind of like where do I stand, you know? And yeah, anybody else have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think in terms of like the queer community, a lot of people forget about intersectionality and just forget that there's so many other ways that people can be privileged. Like just because we're all queer doesn't mean that like a white person or a man doesn't have power over me. And yeah, I definitely agree. And and a lot of like previous queer friend groups I've been in, people have just kind of ignored that and like not exercised or not understood the amount of privilege that they hold and how that can affect their queer experiences. And that's always kind of bothered me.
Kind of don't think of hierarchy as like a strict system where if let's say you're white, then you go up 2 ranks, and if you're a person of color, you go down 3 ranks.
I see it more as an interconnected system where a lot of the factors being our identities, interact with each other in complex ways, if that makes sense. So, that being said, because of that, this hierarchy that you talk about can't really be applied to people of color. You can't separate a queer woman of color's experiences into her experience with race, gender, and sexuality individually. So, when talking about what grants her privileges, I don't feel like it's right to deconstruct her identity and rank it based on that because of how intertwined it all is.
I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I sort of do think it is a web, but I also think
Yeah.
that there are levels of privilege in the web. Like you sort of get different like benefits, I should say. Like we talked about media throughout this entire podcast, and one of the benefits of being a white queer identifying person is that you have the privilege of media somewhat on your side. You have the privilege of that magical moment where you're like, that's me in the media. And with Asian American queer people, with females who identify as queer, who with any other person, people of color, or any other like factor, thing, your identity, um, it's kind of like you don't have the same kind of privileges as other groups. But it is a web. It is a complex web, and it's pretty amazing, but also pretty something.
Yeah, I totally agree. I feel like there are certain identities that grant you more privilege. And so, for example, when we talked about family, we did come to the conclusion that because of the language barrier that I also face, or just the culture surrounding our family, such as not being able to share our emotions freely, that has definitely affected us when it came to our queer identity.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Waylene. It's really frustrating having a language barrier with your family and all of those other differences that a lot of white queer people don't face. So our last topic, we've talked about family and we've talked about friends. So lastly, we're going to talk about ourselves. So how do you think that your queer identity has shaped who you are as a person, your personality, things like that?
Some days I forget I'm queer. I don't know if this is a weird thing to say, but in my head, I'm Asian, I'm Asian, I'm Asian, I'm Asian, I'm Asian, I'm Asian, I'm Asian. Oh, I'm a female. I'm Asian, I'm Asian, I'm Asian, I'm Asian. It's never like, hey, I feel queer today. Feels great, you know? It's more like in the mirror, it's a physical thing I can see. And I know this is a podcast, you can't see my face, but in the mirror, I see my face and I think Asian. Because being queer is not a thing you see necessarily. So it's not something I see when I look in the mirror, but it's kind of like a thing that's on the back of my mind. And then when something happens, I'm like, I'm queer. Can I curse on this? I'm like, God, I'm queer. Oh,
Um, sorry. I feel like I understand what you mean, but I think for me, it's kind of the opposite. I think back particularly in middle school, I was in like a group that was mostly white queer people and they were very judgmental about like how gay someone looks. So I think that like fitting into gay stereotypes, especially in middle school, was like a big part of like my insecurities. And I was constantly worried about like how gay I looked or like if I was being too gay for like my straight friends or being too straight for my gay friends. So I think being queer was definitely like at the top of my mind for a really long time. I think now it's less so, and now like now I'm in a like more predominantly white school where I think my Asian identity kind of like has gone above that, but I think my insecurities about like fitting into gay stereotypes has definitely been very prevalent throughout my life.
When it comes to how my queer identity has shaped how I am as a person, it has made me a lot less social because I feel like it is an important part of my identity. But because I am not open about it to my friends or my family, or because I am unable to share about it at all, it has made me take a step back in my social life.
in relation to the stepping back bit that you talked about, there's also, for me personally, a stepping in moment. Like, I would like, in this podcast, right now, we're stepping in and we're talking about our stories in a way, like, because there aren't people who step in this kind of way, in this sort of like way that like touches a lot of people, hopefully. And I feel like there's a pride in that I get to do this work. Thank you guys. And I feel like it shaped me in a sense that there's a sort of duty in a sense that I have to do this. I like doing this and I like talking with you guys about this. But also at the same time, it's kind of burdening. Like every day, like before this podcast, every day I would sit at work, at school, doing my homework, just like thinking, how can I present my story in a sense that, in a way that is relatable to other people, but also shows a new side of the Asian American queer experience. So I feel like the sort of pride and also the burden sort of just makes a weird sort of feeling that I don't really know how to explain.
Yeah, I think I know what you mean. And I think that's definitely one of the things I thought about a lot in middle school. And it's kind of shaped the way that I am now, where I was so focused on like fitting into white, queer, gay stereotypes. But now I'm really glad to be on this podcast and talking about my own experience and how that's shaped me to become like a more unique sense of myself. And I think being Asian and how there's like there's so few gay Asian stereotypes has allowed me to kind of create my own narrative, I guess, and kind of create like a new sense of who I am.
Did you guys have a moment of realizing that you're queer? Or was it more of a series of events that led you to think, oh my god, I'm more fruity than I realized? For the non-Gen Z in the in the audience, they're Sophia and Waylene are off mute, but they're laughing at me right now. But for the non-Gen Z, fruity is your gayness. I don't know how to explain it. You guys have to Google search it. But yeah, did you have a moment when you realized you were queer, or is it a series of events? Restating my question.
My personal experience with that was that there was an exact moment in 7th grade, but that's like something that's really personal to me, and I don't really want to share that out. And so it really was a big turning point in my life. And from that time in 7th grade, discovering more about myself has been a progress. Like I'm still wondering who I am right now in relations to my identity.
For me, it was, you kind of mentioned it was like a series of events or like an aha moment. It was kind of both, where it was like a kind of a reflection of the series of events. Because now that I look back on it, I was very much a queer kid, even when I was like 6 years old. And I was in like 6th or 7th grade, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, oh, there's a pattern. And it was really concerning at the time. Now I find it really funny. But I kind of just realized there was a pattern and like only one logical conclusion.
I find that really funny for some reason. Just like Sophia sitting in her room and going, "Oh my god, dear Lord, I am gay as."
That was exactly what happened, in case you were wondering.
Oh my god, perfect. Okay. For my experience, for my for my experience, it sort of was like I was part of a GSA in middle school. Most of them are white. Just gonna say that. Just gonna throw that out there. And it happened, I think, in 7th grade. The teacher that led that thing, I'm not gonna give names because I'm not gonna try to fire anybody, but he sort of asked a bunch of Asian women, Asian girls, we were girls at the time, and gathered us up and was like, hey, we need more colored people in the GSA. And I didn't really think much of it then. And I joined. But like a few years later, I was just like, oh, he said that's not okay to say, you know? But anyway, that sort of gives a hint on how the GSA experience was. And it was mostly us watching people coming out in movies, people talking about their experience in YouTube videos, and they were all white. And I sort of was just like, I can't relate to any of these people, so I'm probably not gay. Like, they're nothing like me. Their experience is nowhere near mine. So I kind of didn't realize it, even though I do remember in elementary school I did like this girl a lot, but I was like, nah, we're friends. We weren't friends. I was crushing on her so hard. But like after elementary school and going to middle school, it's kind of like, but I'm not gay because they're clearly gay and they're not me. So that was that kind of moment of I'm not like denial, but not in a sense like I didn't want to be, but more like I didn't know what I should be. And then later on, when I was in high school, I won't give any names because Waylene is here and she knows students in my high school and she will probably tell them. No, she won't. I trust her, but also at the same time, oh my god. And I remember there's this one moment when I had a hallway crush and they walked past me and I was like, oh my god, she is very pretty. Jesus Christ, I'm flustered. And then, and then I, like, a few days later, I was like, I'm gay. I like women. This is, oh my god, So that's how I realized I was gay. And then sort of a process after that to figure out what kind of gay. Because I like men too, surprisingly.
Yeah, going back to what Miki said about her middle school GSA, I also had a GSA in middle school, but it wasn't established until I was in 8th grade, and it was started by this group of students. And once again, that jealousy that I had of of them being able to have a space to express themselves and do it so openly in a way that I have not been able to yet. And so I don't know if we should edit this. I remember one time I was like sitting with my group of friends and we got like rainbow bracelets that said "Do not do drugs" or something similar to that. And so the group of people in the GSA came up to us and asked you, "Can we have your bracelets?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, sure, take them." And I was like, "Oh my god, they're talking
I want you
about."
to steal your bracelets? That's a crime. That's your bracelets. You can't do drugs. You gotta keep that bracelet.
I could have sold them at least.
I do want that bracelet though. When you find it, can I have one?
It was like the tie-dye rainbow.
Oh.
I guess my experience with GSA, it was a little bit stressful. I had never really like understood that jealousy that you guys were talking about until like 8th grade, where all of these like 6th graders were coming into GSA and they were all like white rich kids and they were like super confident in their identity and it was really stressful. Like I said I came out in 6th grade. I didn't really become comfortable with it until like 9th grade, but I was still in the GSA because it was fun. But it's like seeing all these 6th graders that like completely understood who they were and were like super confident in their identity was like really stressful. That's like my main understanding of GSA for me, because it was just a lot of stress and me trying to act like I was confident in my identity, even though I very much wasn't.
GSA was so stressful for me, guys. Like, I hated Fridays. Fridays was the day when we had to meet. I hated Fridays. I absolutely like Fridays would come and people would be excited about the weekend. I'd be like, oh, I have GSA. Because it wasn't a positive experience for me. And also, in 8th grade, like you, 6th graders came in. They weren't supposed to be in the GSA. But, like, it was the GSA in my middle school was only for 7th and 8th graders. But the way that they were, like, so openly, like, gay. Like, they had a buzz cut. And they had, like, full-on, like, rainbow hair. And everything about them just screamed, like, I am confident in where I am. And they were, like, allowed to be in because of that. And that's what I was like, why am I here? You know? Like, I haven't fully figured out that feeling yet. But, like, it was kind of like, huh? You know?
Yeah, I think maybe the last straw for at least my middle school GSA was like there was this one kid there and they were basically trying to like tell the others that I wasn't worthy of being in the GSA, and I'm not totally sure why. I can't tell if it was like the bi thing or like I do not know, but it was very frustrating to me because they were trying to like, especially when we went on Zoom, they were trying to like block me from like the Zoom link so I couldn't get on and things like that. And that was very frustrating. That wasn't very fun. And I think, well, I left that school now, so it's better. But I think that was just another solidifying moment where I just felt really insecure in my identity.
We may include this in the podcast, we might not, but to the kid who maybe is listening to this, just so you know, we don't like you. Because that is not a good thing to do. Also, Sophia's amazing. What are you talking about? Not worthy? Jesus Christ. That reminds me of a situation where I was talking to this one girl in the GSA and was like, Can we talk more about the trans experience, the ace experience, all the other experiences, the demi experience? There's so many, and we're not talking about that. We're just talking about gay people, and I love my gay people, but also like they're not the only ones who exist, you know. And what she said to me, she was like, "They're not really relevant right now. They're not really relevant right now." No, they're very relevant. The way she said it was so condescending and so ignorant that I was just like, GSA wasn't really a good experience. I think one thing we should do is, for the American public school system, first have GSAs, but also rethink it.
About rethinking GSAs, I also think that schools should keep in mind who gets to lead them, because establishing a safe space for LGBT people is so important, but you can't have that if you don't have a good leader. And so in my school, the club advisor for my school's GSA, let's just say I have not had the best experiences with him, and I truly don't think he is fit to run it. So in class, he constantly uses my friend's dead name, and for the people who don't know what a dead name is, basically it's a name that someone no longer uses because it does not align with their gender identity. And at the same time, there's another person in my class who goes by a different name, and in this case, it wasn't their dead name, yet the teacher never called them by the wrong name. Now, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be able to be called by their preferred name. I'm just saying that if the teacher can do that, he should also be able to use my friend's correct name. It's not a hard thing to do.
But Sophia, we can mutually agree we don't like him that much because he's not really considerate of other people's experiences. I don't know if I can say this, but he literally told the person who he was dead naming that she should correct her name on the website that we use. No, you can literally cross it out, write her preferred name, use her preferred name, remember her preferred name. It's 3 months into the school semester. You should be doing what you're supposed to be doing. And you're leading the GSA? No. First, I want to thank my fellow co-hosts for being amazing as usual, and for just being so open and vulnerable and so kind to listening to my rants. I'm so sorry, audience. Thank you, audience, for actually. And just thank you to Sophia and Waylene. And Sophia, do you want to close us off?
Yeah, sure. So thank you all for such an insightful discussion. And thank you so much to our listeners for listening and hearing our little rants and hearing our stories and letting us talk about our identity. I think this was a really interesting conversation. And I think if you want to hear some other really interesting conversations, you can listen to the other 2 podcasts in the series. We're not totally sure which order we're going to be releasing them in, but there's going to be 2 others led by our other Apex for Youth ambassadors. And I think they're going to be really interesting. So make sure to look out for those. So thank you so much again for listening, and see you next time.
See you guys. Bye.